If you're looking to start your therapeutic microdosing journey, but don't know where to start, especially when looking for the highest quality ingredients, including nootropics, and what you'd expect from a true microdose capsule, check out our friends at Brainsupreme. They offer the absolute highest quality ingredients so you can start your microdosing journey, knowing that you're getting top-notch ingredients. To find out more, visit their website using that link right in the description, and you can get 15% off your entire order.
I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Stephen Kubacki. Be sure and check out my films. Doors of Perception is on Amazon Prime. Occult Louisiana is on Tubi, Roku Channel, Apple, and more. Visit our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. It's the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. We feature some of your favorite podcasts and content creators. And we are booking guests for December and January. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome Stephen Kubacki. He disappeared for 15 months in 1978 in a conspiracy to start a revolution, and which also involved multiverse experiences. He has written a memoir on that, Conspiracy, Revolution, and Revelation, The Extraordinary Disappearance of Stephen Kubacki after 45 years of silence. Stephen, welcome. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on. I'm really looking forward to sharing the story of your disappearance and reappearance 15 months later, which occurred over 45 years ago. And you recently wrote a book which breaks your silence about the experiences after 45 years. And there's so much to get to in this story. I want to try and touch on as much as possible in the limited time that we have. And I'd love to let you tell the story so the audience can hear it firsthand. But before we get to any of that, this is your first time on. Just tell us a little bit briefly about yourself and let the audience know how they can find out more.
Okay. My name is Stephen Kubacki. Right now I'm a clinical psychologist, and I kind of have an active psychotherapy practice. But I'm also doing a lot of writing. I've written this book about my memoir, about what happened in 1978 during my disappearance. But I'm also writing a lot of other books. I have another book that hopefully will be shopping around with my literary agent soon. It's called The Multiverse Guides Humanity. It kind of gets into multiverse theories and how the multiverse can be a model for us to, make the world a better place and make people happier and have more meaningful lives. I have a master's in linguistics, taught at many universities. I've done a lot of things since my disappearance.
Well, excellent. This is such a fascinating story. Maybe we could just start at the beginning.
I guess we could start with the disappearance on the ice, if that's where you'd like to start. Or
Sure, it sounds good to me.
Okay. So in February of 1978, I and my fellow conspirators decided that I would disappear on the frozen tundra ice of Lake Michigan. And I was a student at Hope College in Holland, Michigan. That's not very far from the lake. Before I went on the lake that day, I often would go cross-country skiing and cross-country ski out on Lake Michigan. And that was in preparation for legitimizing my disappearance, or legitimizing that, in fact, I would do daring things and go out on the lake. And before that, I also did many kind of...
Could you tell us a little bit about how you concocted the conspiracy? What brought the whole thing about?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. What brought it about was I and a group of co-conspirators decided we wanted to really change the world in some way. And we didn't want to do it in the conventional way. We're all pretty smart people. We could have gone our traditional routes and try to reform the system, but we felt the system was unreformable. We felt the system was pretty much controlled by the rich and powerful, and that has not changed over over centuries. And sometimes it gets better. Some people do reforms, and things get better. There's better justice. There's better equality with income. A whole variety of things. But pretty much, the authoritarians, the sociopaths, stay in power and maintain that power with one another through various networks like corporate boards. If anybody knows about corporate boards, everybody's on everybody's corporate board. So that's why CEOs make so much money and a whole variety of things. So anyways, we wanted to change the world in a lot of in a lot of different ways. We also felt that there was a lot of meaningless. There was a lot, even back in the 70s, there was a tremendous amount of addiction, meaninglessness among young people and older people too. The culture industry was getting, not quite the steroids it's on now, but was pretty powerful. And, and people were kind of caught up in that and becoming kind of more empty inside, I thought, in many ways, and filling themselves with commodities. And also at the same time, sort of adopting this sort of philosophy that, I can be powerful and, make lots of money like everyone else. And,
Right.
and it kind of, I just saw communities being destroyed. We're very social creatures. I didn't mean to go off on that tangent, but anyways, that was some of the things we were talking about. We were thinking about. We can talk more about that later. And so we developed an organization called the Nexalistic Revolutionary Front. I know that sounds kind of weird, Revolutionary Front, but that was kind of the jargon way back when people were trying to change things, in at least the way we were trying to change things. And so we developed this organization. It's the word Nexalism comes from a book by A.E. Van Vogt. He's a science fiction writer, called The Voyage of the Space Beagle. And Nexalism is really all about kind of understanding the assumptions and the values and the methodologies of different sciences and literature, the humanities. And a nexalist is somebody then who, because they understand all these things, at least their fundamental levels, is when they're faced with particular problems, can think outside the box and creatively and synthesize solutions. Like a little bit kind of like a Renaissance person, you might say. So anyways, that was the name of our organization. And the organization had two parts to it. One part was what we call the right arm. And there were three people involved in that who were going to gain power and influence and wealth in the traditional sense. So one person was going to go into politics, one person was going to go into finance and business, and another person was going to go in religion. Okay. And so gain power and influence in that way. And so that was kind of the right arm, you might call the legitimate arm, in which, people have tried to do in different ways and various levels of success. And then what made our thing different is that also I would go underground. I would try to develop a people's resistance to the economic and political and cultural structures that are oppressing people. And so I would go underground. In order to go underground, the best way for me to go underground was to sort of disappear and assume a new identity. Okay. And then I would be free to do whatever I needed to do underground. And then sort of the vague goal, because you can't plan any of this, but, was that decades later, each of us would be in our positions where we're supposed to be, and then we would come together, the right and the left, and then we would be pretty difficult to stop with what we wanted to do in the world. Okay. So that was kind of the theory and the idea. In the book, there's lots of documents that I wrote and others and letters, and it's very interesting to kind of read kind of that kind of thinking way back then, though I think it's still pretty relevant now because of all that's going on in our society. It's pretty bad. In fact, things are probably 100 times worse than they were back in the late 70s in terms of authoritarianism and, the addictions that are going on and the sense of meaninglessness and, a whole variety of things. So So anyway, so I think the book addresses that, but yeah, so that was sort of the plan. And so then uh, I had to disappear. So where would I disappear? I was in Holland, Michigan. And the smartest thing, the idea was I would cross country ski out on the ice. So that's what I did. I cross country skied out on the ice. I planted my skis and left my backpack. And then I had a kind of unusual experience right then. This was sort of a surprise, very much a surprise. I was in a very highly intense, you can imagine, state of drama in my life. Though I felt inwardly kind of calm at the same time, because I was about to do what very few people have ever done, if anyone's ever done what we were planning. I don't think there's actually any historical precedence to what we were doing, and it was very extreme, but the extremeness was to counter what we saw as the extreme threats to the destruction of our environment and civilization.
Right.
So I did something very extreme. I did something very extreme. And on the ice, I had this, I kind of bifurcated, my understanding it now is kind of more in terms of the multiverse, that part of me went under the water or entered some interdimensional space. It's kind of hard to say, I have memories of that and what happened, where I met beings of light and kind of inside of an energy shell. And there was sort of this kind of unusual communication with light. That makes any sense, and colors. Right. I mean, light is kind of a wave, sound is a wave. So different ways of communicating, though I had no understanding of it. And I was communicated with in different ways and been reprocessing all that information since then, though there have been other experiences after that too. And then another part of me sort of like bifurcated, left the ice as Nathan T. Stanfield. That was my identity as I left the ice. So there's this sort of kind of two parallel kinds of timelines going on, or worlds kind of going on at the same time. So that was.
So let's explore that a little bit.
Yeah,
as
sure.
far as the circumstances that led to that state of mind, were you gradually falling into an altered state? Was there anything that you physically noticed that led to that?
Well, I was a very heightened state of awareness and intensity. I'm about to do something, that nobody ever does. I was about to disappear, and it was a whole plot and everything behind all this. So, what I was doing was the linchpin to cementing everything.
Basically, I guess, did you pass out, or did you lose consciousness in any way?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you would say I lose consciousness, because, I left the ice as Nathan T. Stanfield. I think what happened was I entered this other dimension. That's how I perceive it as now, is another dimension, and met these beings. And, sometimes when people have, post-traumatic stress disorder, when people have traumas, they can dissociate and see themselves above their bodies, or they go elsewhere. Sometimes they go to other, who knows, universes. There's all kinds of, obviously there's something clearly psychological, biological, but there's also something probably happening in a transcendental or multiverse way too at the same time. Right. Which I later learned and got into in terms of, it's called soul retrieval, where you try to find people's parts of who they are that are lost in different places. That happens with trauma. Very, it's a little similar to what psychologists do, or what you do kind of clinically. But so I had this, but mine wasn't a negative trauma. Mine was a positive one, a positive, intense experience, which led to a dissociation. That's how we think of it psychologically. And part of me entered this other kind of dimension. So that's how it looked. I didn't fall asleep or lose consciousness. That's, I guess maybe in a certain way, but there, I was pretty clear, when I left as Nathan T. Stanfield, I knew exactly what I was doing, and I walked off the ice, and then the whole story began with people trying to find me. That was quite a hullabaloo.
Could you go into a little bit more detail about the dissociation into the identity of Nathan Stanfield? Is that something that just happened in that instance, like an instantaneous thing? Did you gradually start to have downloads of a different personality? Tell us a little bit about it.
No, yeah. Let me I think there's a little confusion. Nathan T. Stanfield was my identity after I left the ice. Okay. And Nathan T. Stanfield was totally locked into the mission of the Nextalistic Revolutionary Front, the NRF. Though, as Nathan, it's kind of, there's me under me in another dimension and me as Nathan. It's interconnected. Okay. It's not like there's no, though there was, in terms of dissociation, kind of not two sort of being separate but together. I don't know. It's very hard to explain. In terms of, I don't think we really understand how that happens. But there's in the multiverse and quantum theory, you can be, there are many, there are an infinite number of yous, at any time, and so I think that's kind of a way I kind of look at it now. So I was, we say I was Stephen under the ice or in this sort of energy shell. And then I had this sort of, might call it downloading of information. That's how I think of it. And it wasn't scary. I found it very benevolent and caring. But I think it's because also previous to that, I had previous experiences and I also did a lot of studying kind of in this area. And so I wasn't scared. And I think a lot of people have these interdimensional experiences, or they have, might call them UFO abductions. I mean, I'm not, and I'm not trying to in any way say there aren't UFOs picking people up and things like that. But I think sometimes people have something that's more interdimensional, like I had. And I think then who you are gets projected onto the experience. So if this is happening without your, any history, any knowledge of what's going on, it can be pretty scary. And then people then see, project what they want to make sense of it. So they might see, horrible aliens and reptiles and things getting implanted in them and all kinds of stuff. Because, it's all, because of the fear and everything. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but, maybe there are, bad, obviously some bad ETs or whatever. But I think, you look at shamanic cultures, it's very typical for people to enter into these other dimensions or realities, and for it to, and to work with other beings or ETs, super ETs, how you want to talk about them. And to have it as a positive experience. Sometimes these beings might put things in them or down, whatever, but it wasn't seen as, surgery or, or cutting you up or some, terrible things or, planting whatever inside of you. So again, it becomes a way of interpreting things. And I think that's probably one of the problems with language around spirituality and these sort of experiences is the language. And it's very culturally based, and instead of, if somebody was very Christian, they might have seen something very different than what I saw. It might still have been benevolent, but it might be kind of angels and heaven or something like that. Yeah. But I tend to be a lot more science-oriented.
How long did this experience last? Do you have an awareness of the amount of time?
It's kind of, I think it's outside of time, outside of what we consider time. So it lasted, long, whatever long is. And I think, this sounds a little, it fits in with the multiverse. I think we're in many places at the same time, but we don't know it. So, there are yous elsewhere that you're connected with, who knows, in other timelines, other universes, dimensions that you may not be aware of. So you might say that me and the energy shell and what was going on there in some ways perhaps is continuing in some way. And I've had experiences since then, meeting these beings of light after the disappearance and a lot of other kinds of experiences. So
now the information you received during the experience, was it instantaneously relayed as like what's understood as a download? Was it a conversation that you were having? How did that come through?
Well, it was like a dancing of light and energy forms. And I felt that I even became like a being of light in some ways, like, and there was this, it wasn't, I don't know, download instantaneous. These are ways of talking about it. The information I received, I'm making sense of it. It's, it was, a lot of it's sort of beyond my understanding. But I think it's informed my writing since then and my ideas. Um, uh, so I think I guess one of the messages I got was that we really need to change our course. I mean, I know other people have gotten messages like this, but we need to change our course. We need to trust one another, create, be more loving and caring. And this idea of the multiverse is kind of being a model that you can follow, because in the multiverse everything is diverse. And I think having these connections, when we have more connections, then we are more stable and more caring. When we have fewer connections, this goes like in psychology, things that love and caring and community creates connections, and people are more stable. The negative emotions reduce connections. So if you're living chronically in negative emotions, or you have a society that's chronically into negative emotions, whether it's envy, divisiveness, hate, rage, all those things, you have fewer connections with other people, and that generally leads to more unhappiness and more dysfunctionality, not just psychologically, but clearly at a social and political and economic level.
Now, before we get further into the information that you received from the experience, what happened when you came back from that experience? What were the series of events to follow?
Well, I had this is where, as Nathan T. Stanfield, I went to Mexico, and then I had some experiences there and in Japan, came back to the States, and then I eventually entered the French Foreign Legion shortly before I reemerged. And it was entering the French Foreign Legion that I realized that I could not carry out my mission. You might say that one of the experiences I had was when I was in Japan, was this meeting this sort of I call the dark monk. This you might call archetypal, but I think it's kind of a presence in some dimension. And the dark monk, again, people might call it different things, but that's how I experienced it. Was a force or a being that believed in what I was told as compassionate ruthlessness, though those two words kind of don't seem to go together, but it's a little bit of an oxymoron. But it was kind of a being that believed in power and strength, and the end justifies the means. And so there was this darkness that I struggled with, because obviously it was within me, and my life since childhood has been a little bit kind of a struggle between the dark and the light. I think most of us have all that struggle, but mine was, I had these experiences with these beings, you might call, or forces, and when eventually towards the end, I kind of liberated myself from you might say, the dark monk, and realized that this was something I couldn't do. I couldn't become, somebody who created tremendous harm in the world and suffering. Which was kind of what I was supposed to do if I, joined the French Foreign Legion.
What led to the dark monk encounter? What were you doing?
Yeah, what led to the dark monk encounter was, let me see, when I was in Japan and I was training in a martial arts dojo, and I went there because of the things that happened in Monterrey, Mexico. I was told to, I was kind of knew I had to leave. There was something else going on there. That's where I met Jaguar, you might say my power animal there that tried to help me. But when I got to Japan, I realized that the dark monk helped me then realize what I needed to do. I kind of got into the dark monk because I had never really kind of, I guess, throughout my life struggled with it, but I was trying to embrace it. And then after that became clear to me, then I left the dojo. The dojo was, it was interesting training. It was very rigorous, meditation and things. But I began, but also there was a kind of a, where we had to go out and hang out with baskets and get money, and there was a whole economics to this that I didn't care for, and it was clearly there was you could see that when you join groups like that, or even the military or other thing, or any kind of group, there's an attempt to change you so you become part of the group. So there's a way of breaking who you are down so you become whatever it is the group wants you to become. That happens in a lot of things. Actually, you even see that I have lot of people who work in corporations as psychologists, and you can see people changing, when they have to work 80, 90 hours a week over months or years. It begins to change people, and they become more part of the system.
Could you tell us a little bit about your Mexico experiences, where you said you came to meet your jaguar power animal?
Yeah. When I was there, I was also training in a dojo, and what I was having dreams of feeling like my energy was something was happening with my energy, and as I got to know there were really brujos who were part of this dojo, that they were doing things, kind of shamanic stuff. You might say sorcery, trying to help people and doing this. So I saw, things happening, but there was a dark side to them. And it felt like in this dream, I had the sense that they were kind of taking energy from my many me's, you might say. And I realized that, and then I had this vision of the jaguar, where I became a jaguar, and it was very clear that I was supposed to, leave this situation. So I did.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about some of the understandings that you came to after this experience.
Sure.
It says that you have a new view of the cognitive root of evil. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that came is, and again, maybe, these kings come from various sources, probably, but I've come to the conclusion, and it comes from there, that certainty leads to harm and suffering. And you see this very clearly in politics and religion. You see this in individual personalities. When people are certain about something, then they usually cause harm to themselves. Obviously religions, there can be ideologies where people kill because they're certain about their beliefs. You see this in religion, you see this in politics, you see this in a whole variety of things. And you also see it in mental health issues. When somebody's very depressed, they are attached to their depression in some ways. They identify with it. Of course, they disidentify with it to some degree, otherwise they wouldn't be seeing you as a therapist. But there is a certainty about it, that this is the only way I can be. I'm stupid, I'm no good, whatever the cognitive thinking is, but there's a certainty behind it. And in psychotherapy, it's part of the job is to break this certainty down so the person can see themselves in their many, many facets, not just they're a failure totally. So that, these gross generalizations are certainties, and they're very harmful psychologically, and obviously very harmful at a systemic and institutional level. So I see that as kind of, when you look at the people who have been most evil in the world, they always have this sense of total certainty and total belief in their dogma and their ideology, for the most part, at least project that.
Well, some would believe that level of evil in our reality is not supposed to be part of this. In a sense, there may have been a parasitic, energetic invasion, a negative intelligence that infected humanity's collective consciousness, and that's what led to basically the state we're in now. Some just believe it's multi-generational programming by these very powerful families, that it just pumped this ideology out to the next generation every time, so they stay in power and they stay psychotic, basically. What do you think?
Well, I think it's multifaceted, so I think, we can look at it many different levels. If we look at it socially, in terms of economics and politics, there's very clearly, what we were talking about before. There's the people in power, I call economic predators or sociopaths. And because they don't have a conscience, because there's no empathy, they can manipulate the vast majority, 99.5% of us, who are caring and loving and, trust and altruistic. I mean, people, I have people who work 80, 90 hours a week for what? So Jeff Bezos can buy a new yacht. I mean, I mean, the parasitic nature of it all is so unbelievable. Yet we all seem to accept it because we get inculcated, brainwashed into this extreme individualism that I can have the power too, I can have the wealth, it's all about winning. and that eventually destroys our communal and social sense. But most people can't do it. Most people cannot be sociopaths.
Right.
It's very hard to be a killer. It's very hard to, or legalize, let's say, legalize criminality. Actually, there's a really interesting book by John Tooby. It's called The Anatomy of Genre. It kind of looks at different like genres in fiction and nonfiction. And one of them is the gangster. And, if you look at we look at corporations, governments, kind of as kind of gangster organizations.
Yeah.
They're kind of criminal. They're kind of legalized forms of criminality. And the justice system supports, corporations, they can do whatever they want. And yet there's very little accountability because they're people after all. We know corporations are people, which is a complete crazy idea when you think about it. But yet it's completely, it's been around for hundreds of years in our, legal system and everywhere around the world. So it helps protect all that goes on and maintains, the various power structures. So, so there's that side. There's clearly, the psychological side of the emptiness people feel because, because we are social creatures, we need to connect, and so back in the old days, my father, I digress a little bit, my father was a union man and worked in tire factory, and he went on a number of strikes. Why did he go on strikes? Well, people back then went on strikes not just to make more money and have salary and better benefits. They did it for the future. They did it for others. It was altruistic, it was self-sacrificing. And the people who promulgate this extreme individualism don't want us to be self-sacrificing. They don't want us to be trusting. They don't want us to have communities. They want us all to be little individuals so we're more easily manipulated. And then then they create these false, communities, these as-if communities through social media and other ways, in order to fill the emptiness. But of course, it's never satisfying. And then all the addictions that go on. And then, so there's that. And then there's the scientific objective level that's very important. And I'm a very believer in space exploration and things like that. So, but science can obviously be misused and has been misused for a variety of things. But when you get into the transcendental world, into the, the multiverse world, I think there are beings out there. It's just like in our world, in our universe, there are probably ETs in our universe. We haven't encountered that probably are not nice ETs, and probably these other dimensions is the same thing. So I think these things are all happening at the same time and kind of feed into one another, but I wouldn't be a reductionist. I wouldn't say, well, it's all, archetypal. It's all in these beings who come and gotten us. And, maybe that's happening to some degree, but there's you can just look what's going on in the world economically and politically, and you don't need to go far from there to see how messed up it is. So I think we need to operate on different fronts. So we need to operate at a spiritual, what I call a multiverse level to help change things. We need to work at a political, economic level. We need to work at a scientific level. We need to work psychologically. And that's one of the things I learned from my disappearance. My disappearance was very focused on you might say the social world, on politics, economics, to some degree on the transcendental, the multiverse. And I realized that in order to really change things, you also have to change yourself. You also have to have awareness of who you are. And so that's why I eventually became a psychologist, because I needed to figure that out. It's funny. When my first marriage, I remember one of the reasons why I became a psychologist, because I was tired of my wife knowing more about emotions and doing circles around me interpersonally, because I was a typical male idiot.
Right.
So I decided, no, I don't like, this sort of, and so that's one of the reasons why I became a psychologist, so that I could understand that way of being and also evolve and help others.
How did your disappearance play out in the eyes of the world on the surface level?
Oh, well, geez. When I disappeared, there was, there were divers looking for me, helicopters. And this is the part that I feel very remorseful about. I don't do guilt. I feel remorseful about it. That, I put my parents through hell, my family and friends, and, I caused a lot of disruption, and my disappearance, which most people thought I was dead. My mother didn't. But most people thought I was dead. I went under the ice, created a lot of, a lot of suffering for various people. And I can't rationalize that. I can say, well, I was doing it for a higher purpose. I can say that, but the facts are the facts. That's what happened. And so I regret that to some. I feel remorseful about that. On the other hand, where I was and my fellow co-conspirators, I think we were doing the best we could with where we were at and what we were maybe destined to do. So I never harmed anybody when I disappeared. Nothing like that ever happened.
How far did the rest of your group get with their objectives?
Well, it was only 15 months, so not very far. But people were all moving in the directions they were supposed to. And then when I reemerged, they continued on their trajectories, though not in the same way. And I think some kind of got lost. Some became the very thing we were against in some odd way. After I reemerged, you're not going to believe this, but I got involved in a financial center in downtown Boston. And had the corporate suit and everything. And don't ask me why. It's because I think I was just trying to balance kind of what happened before, and I just wanted to be more legit. I wanted to follow a more legitimate path. And then it was funny. I went to a Christmas party. I was dancing too crazy, and the manager said, stop, no, don't do that. And she called me in the office a couple of weeks later, around after New Year's, and she said, Steve, I really like you. You're real smart, but you're never going to make it here because people can see through the three-piece suit, And I said, yeah, you're right. And I gave my notice 2 weeks later and went back to school.
So how did your reemergence play out? What was the series?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. So at the end, I decided that I had to reemerge because basically the Nexus Revolutionary Front was no more because I couldn't carry out my side of what I was supposed to do because I realized it would have changed me in some terrible way. And that was one of the weaknesses. We were secretive. We should have been not secretive. And, my life has been more about full transparency. But, when I reemerged, I needed to protect my fellow conspirators and me. And so that's why I said I was amnesic. I didn't remember anything. And this is a way to protect everybody so they could go on with their lives. And it was also a way for me not to be defined by those events either. But I protected my fellow conspirators because if it all came out, who knows, there could have been a lot of very negative implications with all that. And their lives would have been more difficult to move forward. So after I reemerged, which was difficult, I was very dissociative at the time. It kind of taught in the book, you'll see that kind of what's going on. And with sort of the energy shell beings and other things. And, my family was very happy to have me back. My mother and father and family, accepted me back very lovingly, though I would say some of the family were not, didn't believe the story or, felt still kind of angry about the whole thing. And I have recently talked to some family and we've had some very interesting discussions around it because it was very traumatic for them. And even my reemergence was traumatic for others. And so I've been kind of dealing with that now that the book is out about it. But it was difficult because, I felt I had failed in my mission. And even though I was glad I failed, I felt I had failed. And so, trying to get myself together was difficult, but eventually I did.
Let's talk a little bit more about some of the information and downloads received from your experience. What are some other bits of profound information that you got during this experience that we haven't gone over yet?
Well, it's sometimes it's kind of hard to say what I got loaded and what I've learned since then, but I think we can enter states of what's called, scientists call quantum consciousness. There's a lot of physicists who believe in quantum consciousness, and quantum consciousness is when your brain reaches a state that allows it to access the multiverse of the infinite possibilities. And in quantum mechanics, if an electron if it's not in relationship or interacting anything, could be anywhere in the universe, and in fact is everywhere in the universe until it interacts, and then we know where it is, or more probable where it is. So the more interactions there are between things, like a rock, they have all these atoms and molecules, they all interact, and so it stays the same over time. At least, at least what we understand as time. And that's called quantum decoherence. It stays the same. But when you get a state of quantum consciousness, what happens is you quiet the mind. Meditation can quiet the mind. It can quiet the established neural nets and all the chatter. And so there's less connections, it sort of simplifies things. So then that then enables you then to enter these other dimensions into the multiverse. And we do that without, dreams. Some dreams have kind of multiverse qualities to it because the mind is quieter, and then it has more accessible access to these other worlds. Though the access is always limited by our cultural background, our knowledge, our personal history of how we interpret it and make sense of it.
I was going to ask you about dreams, but also different types of altered states, maybe induced by psychedelics. If this is having the same effect on our consciousness, allowing access to some of these realms. I have had plenty of experiences with psychedelics, but also have interviewed many who are in the research space. Example, the recent experiments being done on DMT and mapping the DMT realms, which is fascinating that science is becoming aware, not only aware, but trying to explore the possibilities of accessing some of these realms.
Yeah. I think, science is very important here because science is focused on methodologies and procedures and replication and reliability. And I think, one of the things that I've been working on, I call it constructive dissociation, is kind of looking at the different methods and et cetera from ancient traditions and spiritualities like meditation, and trying to, take away the cultural aspects and a lot of the, some of the rituals, some of the things, so that anyone can learn these things, anyone can traverse the multiverse, and we do them dreaming. And the thing about psychedelics, I think, works in the opposite way of the way I'm talking about. I think things like meditation, prayer, help quiet the mind, and by quieting and having these fewer connections, you can more enter a state of quantum consciousness, or what's in physics in terms of subatomic particles is called quantum coherence. So you can be many places, but I think psychedelics does the opposite. It floods the mind with new information because all your neural nets are lit up. And by that influx, that overwhelming information, it overwhelms the established neural nets, and so then that enables you then to enter these other dimensions. And so I think it's kind of the opposite. You can see, sometimes people can do ecstatic dance, and through that kind of ecstatic dancing, kind of get into places. And so there's kind of both. There's kind of the more quiet approach, you might say, or quieting of the mind, and then there's the more overloading of the mind.
Let's get your thoughts into the nature of the human experience. This is such a multi-layered topic to try and explore, but as it relates to contact with other intelligences, the multiverse, different versions of ourselves, what could the purpose of this experience be if we come into it and we have no idea what we're doing? Basically, we come in with a memory wipe and we have to figure it all out ourselves. Certain people may have profound spiritual experiences, contact with other beings that give them clues and hints to how to proceed in this realm. But do you think this is a realm for our understanding, learning, and growth, or something more that we don't understand?
Well, I think it is an area for growth and understanding, but, we're dealing with things we might call incomprehensible, for us where we are. And so what it all really means, that's that's hard to tell. I mean, the analogy. I know people have made this analogy before in different ways, but if you have a blood cell running through your body, it thinks, if it had a consciousness, which it does of some sort, it sees itself, but doesn't realize it's part of something bigger. And so we may be part of things bigger we don't understand. And there's all kinds of religious interpretations of that and ideas about what that might be. But we haven't got any scientific evidence to support of that. And I think that's one of the problems, is that is a lot of the multiverse is going to be incomprehensible. Actually, this is based on kind of what we know in kind of the astrophysics of the multiverse. But also, I, and a mathematician, we developed two mathematical proofs that support the multiverse, and they're based on Gödel's ideas of inconsistency and incompleteness. That is, everything is inconsistent, incomplete, and contradictory. Gödel is Godel. He was a contemporary of Einstein, and basically he made everything uncertain. Everything is changing. And so we took his ideas and kind of said, well, if our universe is incomplete, then what's outside of that? Another universe. And you take that infinitely, mathematically, you then come up with the theorem of totality, which is, in order for anything to exist, the established, the imagined, and everything unimaginable must exist in some way. So everything that even beyond what we can imagine, the totally incomprehensible, exists in some way. At the same time, we also developed a theorem called the theorem of boundary conditions that says that in order for anything to exist, it has to have structure, it has to have limitations and boundaries. So our structures and limitations boundary what we can access and make sense of in the multiverse. And so there'll always be things that will be very incomprehensible.
What are your thoughts of simulation theory, some of the newer theories that have been coming out about the nature of reality? We're at a level of technology where this is how we compare our reality to the level of understanding we're at, and that's what we're looking at it as. But what are your thoughts on that theory?
Well, it kind of goes back to the movie The Matrix. I mean, that's kind of where some of that comes from. And it's very possible we live in a matrix. It's how can you argue against it? The thing is that the problem with theories is, from a scientific perspective, you have to be able to test it. You have to be able to contradict it. Actually, what people don't understand about science is based on falsification, not confirmation. Science isn't based on confirmation bias, looking what you want. You're supposed to disprove what you're trying to look at. And that's why it has to reach a level of confidence that is beyond just chance. But anyways, I won't get into scientific theory. But so you have to, you have to see, well, what's really going on here? The matrix, we could be in one. And maybe in some ways we are. I mean, sometimes people have all kinds of psychological insights or multiverse experiences that help them see the illusions we're in. We're in a lot of illusions in this world, and delusions, and that sometimes can help us break through that. And is that kind of a matrix? Yeah, I guess so. In a certain way. I mean, look at we're a society that is destroying our planet. And probably destroying civilization, and yet somehow we're okay with it. I mean, we're all not okay with it, but somehow it just keeps going on, because at some fundamental level, we can't stop what we're doing. And that's kind of a matrix. That's sort of a matrix,
Let's explore the current state of humanity, where we're at now. For the past few years, there has been what is perceived to be an awakening, people becoming aware of things, people becoming aware of the level of corruption and how much the system is anti-human in a sense. And this is causing a lot of upheaval, a lot of chaos, a lot of distrust of our systems and government. And on top of that, we're introduced to social media, AI, and these algorithms that keep people programmed in certain boxes. And we're at a state of destruction and chaos, honestly, where our systems are breaking down. They can no longer sustain themselves. And there's a level of psychosis for people who are deeply programmed and trying to get answers, basically. What are your thoughts on where we're at and how to navigate it?
Well, where we're at is not very
Hmm.
good. I mean, what you just stated makes that very clear. I don't think people would argue with that. Yeah, people have different takes, and there's a lot of denial about what's going on, tremendous denial. But again, the denial's there is to maintain the power structures that are, and changing it is going to be very difficult. I think the problem with reform that's been going on, if we look at, let's say, distribution of wealth, there's this one thing, is that it kind of changes things a little better, but the system continues. The people who are very rich, the people who are very powerful, yeah, maybe they give up a little of their money, but the system doesn't change, and they continue to do what they want to do. So the Amazon's being destroyed. It has been, and still continues to be destroyed for lumber and a variety of other things. And who cares about the biosphere? Who cares about what else is there? It's all about making money and power. Power actually is a bigger one than money. And so how do we change that? I think the way, there's a lot of good critiques out there about what's going on in the world. I mean, tremendous, brilliant books by brilliant authors, and the problem though is I'm not really seeing, and I don't know if I really have anything here. I hope I do. That's really constructive. How do we change things? How do we make things different? And I think we began to look at the very kind of the way we think of economics as one of them, and governance, and begin to change that. People are doing things, and we need to develop a sense of community. For example, I know it sounds a little radical, but people who work in a big corporation, the IT corporation, why don't they just all get together, leave the corporation, or some of them, and start a really different way of doing business, where everything is democratic, total accountability, some basis on merit, and get rid of the overlords. I mean, there's no reason why we can't do that, but it's very hard because as time has gone on, community has broken down. We have less and less trust of one another. And that makes it difficult for people to do that. And, who wants to give up their big bank accounts, or who, people are afraid, and when you keep people in a state of fear, it's very hard for them to trust others. And so this is the problem, is we're social creatures, but the system wants us to become asocial, as you call dehumanized, so that we then are more and more easily manipulated. And we need to get together. We need to have, when you look at it, I mean, why aren't there more unions? I mean, why aren't people fighting back? People can, here in Seattle, people can't afford, people working 2 or 3 jobs to pay the rent and food and or credit card, credit card maxed. They can't survive, I mean, but yet somehow, when you talk about, well, let's all get together and develop unions or do something, people can't seem to be able to do it. They're terrified. And they've also bought into the system. And we have, this addiction, through sports. I like sports too, but people live through sports. They live through their social media. They live through all these as if communities. And we've learned to become a passive society. We've learned not to take praxis. Praxis is an ancient Greek word, which means taking your thoughts and feeling what you feel strongly about and trying to actualize it in the world and do something, whether it's politically, psychologically, spiritually. And we become a very passive society that consumes. And we've lost the ability to go out and act. Yeah, there are people who still go out and act. We call them entrepreneurs, and maybe they get rich, or, people are doing things. There's a lot of ideas, a lot of great scientists, all sorts of stuff. But it's very hard to change the system, but we need to get back at our at what it means to be a human being, and begin to reach out and care for one another, and that starts in small ways.
I think we've become too comfortable. The system has made us too comfortable by what it has provided in the past, but now the system is breaking down. It is no longer sustainable to provide those handouts that kept everybody comfortable, and it is a little chaotic at the moment. But I think the only way to get to the other side of it is to go through it and learn from the chaos that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, sometimes, suffering can lead to
Mm,
change. I don't want people to suffer. It's not what my job is about and what I try to do. I want to end suffering. Um, but yeah, I don't, maybe if it sounds terrible, but if things get worse, then maybe people will do
mm,
something about it. Maybe it's not bad enough. Whatever reason, it's not bad enough.
yeah,
I mean, there are people
yeah,
doing things. There are still elections. There are people doing things that, from small communities all the way up. So, there is resistance. There is an attempt at change. The problem, I read something recently by Bernie Sanders. It was in the New York Times. And he was talking about how the Democratic Party, lost its way, starting maybe with the Clintons or before that. And basically it aligned itself with corporate IT, and it's lost its connection with the people. And when Democrats when the other party comes up with ideas to distribute wealth and the Democrats don't, the Democrats are in trouble, and increase, if they can't pass a bill, to charge wealthy people, only 2 or 3%, that's pretty pathetic. It needs to be 30%. You know what I'm saying? It needs to be much higher than 2 or 3%. So, and so there's a lot of co-opting that goes on, and this is a problem that we were facing back in 1978, is the way we saw things, which is why we did what we did. Again, it sounds like a rationalization, but we didn't want to be co-opted. We saw people were co-opted, get into the system and only care about making money and power and fuck everyone. And then there were people who were reformers, glad they were reformers, but at some level they accept the basic structure of things. Yeah, there's still there's still zillionaires and the poor, and the 5% own 95% of the wealth. And, yeah, we can, change things a little bit here and there, make things a little more democratic, a little more. And then you have people who are marginalized. Another thing is we don't want to be marginalized. I could have gone into academia. Actually, I did go into academia at some point in my life for about 14 years. But that's where you get rid of people who have radical ideas. You marginalize them by putting them in
mm,
academia
yeah,
because
yeah,
they can write all kinds of interesting books and this and that, but they're marginalized. Yeah, they have an audience of some students or something. So they get, so there's a lot of marginalization, or people get exploited. Very intelligent people get sucked into very we'll say evil corporations or things like that, are doing bad things, and the corporations can pay them a lot of money, but exploit their intelligence. So it's very hard to change things because we're being pulled in many different directions. And
right. We're at a very interesting point, I'll say that. Last few minutes we have, tell us a little bit about what's next for you.
oh, thank you. What's next for me is I'm trying to get my next book out, The Multiverse Guide to Humanity, which is kind of looking at the multiverse and how it can be used to make sense of our world, help connection, and yeah, address some of our human conflicts and help us, regain what you were talking about, becoming more human, becoming a German. In German, it's more Mensch, becoming a more of a Mensch. And so there's a lot in there. And then I'm also working on a couple other books. One is called The Sane Society and the Infinite Finite Personality, where I kind of look at what we can do to increase, you might call, kind of a positive action in the world versus repressive action. There's a lot of forms of repressive action. And it always happens when one world dominates another world, like the scientific dominates the religious dominates another, these or the economic. When there's forms of domination across systems, then this leads to all kinds of form of repressive action. And then another book I'm working on is planetary economics and governance. And that's kind of a reworking. That's probably my most ambitious, in some ways, most radical book. It's really looking at changing the way we think about economics, the basic, right at the most basic things. Like scarcity is really an illusion. We live in a world of abundance, yet that's one of the primary concepts. Economists talk about what's rational. What's rational in economic theory, standard economic theory, is total self-interest. This goes against everything we know in psychology, anthropology, and sociology. People are social creatures first. And then, we are individuals and social creatures, but we're not governed by extreme self-interest. But yet that's the basis of most economic theory, modern economic theory. I mean, it's unbelievable how much nonsense there is in modern economic theory. And yet we have these priests, and people on the talk shows and, about, and the problem with economics is no predictability. You can't predict history, and yet there's all this attempts at prediction. And my little story is you get 200 economists together. One of them has a prediction for the future. One of them statistically is going to be right, and that person gets a Nobel Prize. I don't mean that the people get the Nobel Prize, but just Anyways, so those are some of the things I'm working at, and you can find some of this stuff on my website, StephenKubacki.com, just StephenKubacki.com. So some of that's on there.
Excellent. And that is the best way for people to find out more is from your website? Yeah, from that website, and hopefully I'll be getting some more things out in the future. Well, we will have links to that in the description. Stephen, thank you so much. Until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We will talk again tomorrow. We'll see y'all then.